Hey, everybody. So, y'all will laugh. I was chatting with my friend Nancy yesterday, and she told me that she was heavily distracted by the placement of my microphone in some recent videos. So, Nancy, I have moved it. I did a test before I started to make sure that it still sounded okay. So, y'all let me know if you're watching live, if you cannot hear me okay, but I thought it sounded fine. So, I have moved the mic a little bit down and out of the frame. Let's dive into today's topic. Are you ready to take the leap from side hustler or freelancer to creative empire builder? Today's episode is all for my creative services provider, specifically graphic design and branding companies. So if you are in that area, you're making beautiful graphics, you are not designing websites. We're going to talk about that later. Not writing copy. We're going to talk about that later. This is really specifically for my friends who are moving around pixels on the design front, or drawing, hand drawing, doing branding, all of those things. Visual art, basically, is what we're talking about today, but for business. So if you are in this realm, your services are starting to sell like hotcakes, you have finally decided you're going to really go all in and build this business as a real business, you may not be prepared for what comes next. Or maybe if you have started building your business, you're starting to see some issues pop up. So you may find that you don't have the answers for the questions that come with selling and delivering your graphic design or branding services, such as you want to send your potential clients a proposal that shows that you're a professional, also outlines what's expected from everybody as you're working together, but you're not sure how to make sure that you're on the same page from day one. You don't know how to put together a proposal like that. You maybe aren't sure if you're clearly communicating with your clients what happens if they have to cancel or if you have to cancel, when their payment is due, whether or not you offer refunds, all those really critical points that come with your working relationship. You may also not be sure about your website, whether you have the right policies in place, what's required, what's optional, how you can protect any graphic design or other content that you have on your website. All of those questions are totally normal. And then the last question that I see a lot is once your business starts to grow, questions start popping up about bringing on contractors to help you, or even maybe employees or team members. So we are going to cover all of those things today. Today is really an overview of legal for graphic designers and branding companies. So let's dive in. The first thing that I mentioned, and this kind of goes to the beginning of your working relationship, and I should say, I always start with any new client that comes to work with the AWB firm. When we sit down and we have what we call a legal roadmap session, which is like a legal audit of their business, we always start with contracts because it is, in my opinion, my humble opinion, the most important legal protection for your business. And I should mention, standard disclaimer, I am an attorney. I am licensed to practice law in Tennessee. This is not legal advice. If you are listening or watching, please take this as information only. It's meant to get your wheels spinning and help get you pointed in the right direction. But if you have individual questions, please make sure you speak with a lawyer. All right, so getting back to contracts, I really think that they are the most important protection for your business. And the reason for that is I have spent 5 years working with businesses, mostly online businesses, and dealing with all of the issues that pop up, the problems they have, the things that they don't talk about on social media. I hear about all of them. And let me tell you, the kinds of issues that they are dealing with almost always come back to client relationships or customer relationships, or a misunderstanding with a contractor, or they hired someone to do this and it didn't go very well. Almost all of their issues really start and end with a contract. And so that's why I think it is so critically important that you have the right contracts for your business. And that's going to look a little different depending on what kind of business you have. So for my graphic designers, for my branding companies, your project proposal is typically going to be the way you start an interaction with a customer. Maybe someone approaches you, they're not sure even what they need, or they say, I want a logo, or I need new worksheets for my online course. They may have an idea. You may work together on what they need. But typically, they're going to ask you, what's it going to cost? And what am I going to get? And so that is often delivered in a proposal. So you want to make sure that you have a solid proposal document in your arsenal that you can send out, that is clear, that maybe gives a little information about your own company and what you're going to do. Maybe it gives a little quick design brief, what the client is expecting or what you talked about, what their goals are, but it really clearly outlines what you're going to do, any deadlines, the cost, just kind of the basic nitty-gritty should be in your project proposal. Now, I do have some clients, some graphic and branding companies that I've worked with who really like the client to just sign off on the proposal, and then that's the contract. And the downside to this is that you are typically not including in your project proposal all of the different legal terms that you really need to have in your client agreement. So my preference, again, it's just a preference. I'm just one person. But I have seen this work. In my opinion, I think it's the best, is to have a project proposal. The other thing, I don't want to forget this, is that sometimes when you present a proposal to a client, you give them options. And maybe you've got a couple, this is very common. Maybe you have like 3 different packages or 3 different kind of levels of service that they could hire you for. And so if they're just signing the proposal, it can be tricky to know what exactly did they agree to? What do they think they're getting? Sometimes they even kind of pick and choose, and you gave them options A, B, and C, but they really want option X, which they're putting together. And maybe that's fine. Maybe you can kind of work on that. But if you are having your clients just sign the proposal and that's your contract, I just find it can get very muddled. So what I prefer is you have a project proposal and then it's followed up with a contract. Now, these should work together. They should say the same things, except that your client contract is going to go a lot more in detail into some of the more legal things about your relationship. So you wouldn't necessarily, and I will say we do have templates for these. Our client services contract, we call it the creative client services contract. It's one of our best sellers. I want to say it's maybe 6 or 8 pages. It's not crazy long, but that's a lot of terms and conditions to put at the end of a proposal. So I think having that just be a separate step in your sales process and your client onboarding process, I think clients expect it. It's not crazy to have that be a separate step. And so I like having them, they work hand in hand. They should be compatible. They should say the same things. It's not like you have one thing in the proposal and then they get the contract and it's bananas and it's a totally different ballgame and they're surprised and don't understand. No, they should work together. But I personally just like to have them separate. So we've got our proposal. We've got an awesome proposal. We've got a client services contract. So this contract is really, this is how you make your money. People are hiring you. They're paying you to provide creative services to them. This is the most critical. If you ignore everything else I say in this episode, but you put in place a solid client contract, that is going to take care of like 99% of the legal issues that are going to come up in your graphic design or branding business, because that is the fundamental way that you're working with clients. That is the protection that you really need. So this is where you make sure that you and your client are totally on the same page about what you'll do. You might reference the proposal in this area. So you might say, you agree to the services we outlined in the proposal. Or if you did what I talked about, if you kind of mixed and matched some of the different options from the proposal, you might want to put that in the contract. Because again, we just want to be really clear on what they're getting. And I've been giving this example lately. We hired Launch Party with Shelly Easter recently to put together a website for the law firm. If you haven't checked it out, it's beautiful. Links below, awbfirm.com. And I read the contract. We even made a couple revisions, and then we got into the project, and I literally just couldn't remember what exactly the deliverables were that we had agreed on. I couldn't remember how many pages. I couldn't remember if we outlined this, that, or the other. And I wanted to be really careful that I was not taking advantage of her. I didn't want to be asking for more than we had agreed to. Because when you get into a project, sometimes everybody has lots of brilliant ideas, or you just forgot. We frankly just forgot about a couple things we needed. And so I went back and looked at the contract to see, do I need to ask her to do this? Do we need to put this on hold? Do I need to just say, quote me a price for this? And we did a little of all of that. Some of the things we put on the shelf, some of the things I said, just give me a price. I'm happy to pay extra for this because we didn't include it. You didn't quote it as part of your proposal. So I think it's really critical for both the client and you to have a place that you can refer back to where it's very clear what you agreed to do, what the deliverables were for a graphic design or branding project, because there are a million different things that you can do. And the client is probably going to want all of them once they fall in love with you and are so pleased with your design services. So that's the first thing in your client services contract. You want to make it really clear that everybody's on the same page about what you're going to do. That contract is also going to protect you about payments. So we need to get paid. We're not doing business just for fun. If you've got a payment schedule, if you have, maybe you take a deposit, is that deposit refundable if the project goes off the rails? All kinds of payment terms need to be in your contract. And there's, again, a billion different ways that you can set that up. In our template, we have a couple of standard ways that we find is most people like, but you can totally edit that. That's the nice thing. They're totally customizable to you and your business. If you've got a deadline for the different deliverables, you might want to put that in there too. And you might even tie your payments to the different deliverables. So that's something to think about. And then you definitely want to have some terms about cancellation. This is something that when I review contracts that maybe a client has put together themselves or they've borrowed someone else's, it's a really important term because either you may want to fire the client or the client may want to fire you, or COVID could happen. I mean, there's all kinds of things outside of your control that can pop up. And you may need to look at how can we end this relationship. And you've got to have a solid cancellation or termination term in there that says how we do that, how we pay each other. Is there a refund? Is there extra money owed? All of that needs to be just laid out very clearly. And then who owns the intellectual property? So graphic designers and branding companies, y'all are creating intellectual property. You're creating copyrighted works. And I'm a U.S. lawyer, so this is under U.S. law. A lot of people don't know this, but under our copyright law in the United States, if you as a business hire an independent contractor to create something for your business, a logo, a workbook design, set of graphics that you can use on your website, any of that kind of creative work, the graphic designer, the contractor actually owns all the rights to that work. So it's crazy, I know, but if you are the business hiring them, you're paying them, you're probably giving them direction. You may think that you own it by default, but that is not the case. It is the opposite of what most people think. But you can change that by putting it in your contract. So you and the graphic designer, the business and the graphic designer may want to negotiate that. That is a hotly negotiated term. Who owns what? So again, you want to make sure it's really clear so that there are no questions later. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the other things that should be in your client contract. That's kind of a high-level overview. There's lots more in there, but that should at least hopefully get your wheels turning. And I hope you're starting to see where these questions can come up, where issues can pop up, and how having that clear contract is absolutely critical. All right, so let's shift to your website. Now, I added this later in my list of what you need as a graphic designer or branding company because so many of my graphic design clients really start by, maybe they side hustle, they have a day job, and they just have friends or family who start using them, and then it's a lot of word of mouth, what I have found. So a lot of them don't even have a website in the beginning because you don't really need one. Maybe you throw up a portfolio or you have some, maybe you have a business Facebook page or something, but often a website comes later, which is fine. I mean, that's amazing if you don't need one in the beginning. But probably at some point you are going to want a website to advertise your products and services. And there's two really important things that I want you to know about. So a privacy policy is required under U.S. law. So if you're a U.S. business, you have to have a privacy policy if you're doing business in all 50 states. And for most of my online business clients, that is certainly the case. They're doing business. They will take someone from all over the place. The reason I mention that is this is actually a California state law that requires this. So even if you're not located in California, if you're interacting with California visitors to your website, which my guess is you are, you still have to comply with these rules. So I just kind of act like it's a U.S. law, even though it is a California law. But you have to have a privacy policy on your website. And what this does is it just tells visitors if they give you any personal information, so that could be like an email to sign up for your email newsletter list, or if you have any freebies or downloadable resources that you let people have in exchange for, entering their email address. If you have a contact us form, if you have an inquiry form for potential clients, any of those kinds of things, if you let people schedule a call on your website, anytime you're accepting personal information, you have to tell people how you're going to use it. So it's not complicated, and I don't recommend that you DIY it, or I guess I recommend that you DIY it with a template. I don't recommend that you try and put this together yourself. There are some very specific requirements of what has to go in there. So for that one, I recommend just getting a template, Yes, we have one. Making sure that it's got all the right stuff in there. You can post it on your website, and it's kind of set it and forget it. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to update it when you change things. It's just if you've got the right stuff in there and you're not changing how you're dealing with people's data, like if you start selling people's personal information to a third party or something, yes, you'd have to update it. But most businesses are just using it for internal purposes. You're not, selling it to anybody else. You can do it one time and then you'll be finished. The second thing I get a lot of questions about is website terms and conditions. So these are often listed in the footer of a website. You've probably seen them. The privacy policy is linked, and then the terms and conditions are linked right there beside it. Terms and conditions are not required, but I think they're a good idea, and here's why. Especially if you're a graphic or branding company, your website is probably beautiful. It has a lot of creative elements on it. You've probably, done amazing branding for your own company, or maybe you have portfolio things showing your client work. There's probably a lot of visual imagery on your website. Your terms and conditions is where you tell people whether or not they can use that copyrighted material. Can they copy it? Can they print it out? Can they post it on their own website? Can they use it in their own project? That's kind of where I call it the rules of the road for visitors to your website. So you tell them, I own this, or I have a permission to use it from my clients who own it. You may use it, you may not use it, you may use it, but only with my permission. You can put all that stuff in your terms and conditions. And then it's often kind of a catch-all for other things. So you may want to have some disclaimers if you are, for graphic and creative designers, this is not really an issue, but if you were like me, a lawyer, that's where you might put a disclaimer. This is not legal advice. For graphic designers, you're not, getting into any areas that could be tricky with that. But let's say maybe you do some business consulting. For other graphic designers, you might put a results disclaimer or an earnings disclaimer in there that you're not promising anyone that you're going to take their business to $5 million in a month. So it's often a catch-all to kind of put some of those other documents or terms or things that you might want on your website. So that's your website terms and conditions. It's not required, but it's a good idea. All right. And then the last kind of legal document that I want to touch on for graphic designers and branding companies is an independent contractor agreement. So you will probably find, hopefully, your business will be booming and you will need some help. And that may look like a lot of different things. Maybe it's a virtual assistant to help you with administrative work. Maybe it's a copywriter to help you with that piece. Maybe people are coming to you and you'd like to offer that, but you don't do that yourself. Or maybe you just need another designer to help you with the workload. So oftentimes people will bring in independent contractors as kind of a first step to building their team. Well, like I mentioned before, if you have someone who's creating creative work, they own it. They own the copyright if they are not an employee. And if you're using independent contractors, you need to change that in writing so that either you own it, or if you're working on client projects, that the client owns it. You don't want 5 years down the road, a client comes back to you and says, I want to register the copyright. I want to make sure I've got all the rights clear. And you're like, oh, I used a contractor on that project. I didn't get permission. And then it's a hot mess. We deal with that pretty frequently. When we are doing copyright registrations for clients, they may have an online course or something with a lot of different parts and pieces. And we will sometimes find that a photographer, they never got a release, or a graphic designer who worked on the workbook, they never got a release. And so we can't register that with the Copyright Office because our client doesn't actually own the rights. So it's really important as, part of doing good service for your clients and living up to your side of the contract, that you have all the rights from any contractors you're using on your team. And then that contract is going to cover all the same bases that we talked about with your client contract, things like payment schedule and how you can terminate the relationship, all the other things about working together. You want to make sure that that is really clearly spelled out. So an independent contractor agreement is critical anytime. They may have their own if you're working with a more established contractor, or if they have their own, solid business. And that's fine for you to sign theirs. You just want to read it and make sure it includes everything that you think is necessary. And you can always negotiate. You can always say, hey, I see it's missing a termination clause. Can we add that? Or if it's just a hot mess, you might say, hey, I have my own contract over here. Do you mind if we use mine instead of yours? So it may be kind of a meet in the middle. But I always mention this, you do not want to sign both contracts. You want to pick one and add or subtract terms as necessary. Maybe you have an addendum or something, but you don't want to have two contracts signed for the same project because they're probably going to have different things in them, and it's going to be a mess to sort out what you really wanted afterwards. Okay, so after your contracts and your website are squared away, here are some other things I want you to think about. And you may be surprised that I didn't talk about these sooner, but there's a reason. So you might want to set up a corporate entity. So this is a LLC or a corporation. This is going to be done in your state where your business is located. So the rules are a little different in every state. I can't give you 100% guidance on this. You will want to talk with a lawyer in your state, ideally, and a tax professional when you're making this decision, because there are some costs associated with forming an LLC or a corporation. You want to make sure that you know how all that is going to play out. So you're going in with eyes wide open. And there may be some choices that you want to make depending on the tax issues or the legal issues in your state. So it's definitely important to make that decision wisely. I don't think for a graphic designer or a branding company, that needs to be the first thing that you work on. Because the good news is when we think about an LLC or a corporation, the reason why you do that is because you're worried about liability. What that means is you're worried about someone suing your business and taking your house or taking your car. I think this is what keeps us up at night, is that if something goes wrong in the business, it could go terribly wrong and then we lose everything. So that what that LLC or corporation does is it builds a fence around your business. So if something goes wrong in the business, it kind of stays in the business. They can't get at your personal house. They can't get at your personal car or your personal bank account. They can only get at whatever is in the business. So when we think about that, we think about what's the risk? What could you be sued for? As a graphic designer or branding company, your risk is really pretty low. That's the good news. You're not taking people skydiving. You're not going scuba diving. You're not doing yoga. You're not doing all these really physical things where people could get hurt. You're probably not hosting conferences where, an accident could happen. You're probably not, taking team members in your car. You're probably sitting at a computer in your home office or maybe a co-working space doing your work. Maybe you're going to clients' offices and visiting them. But when we think of the things that could go wrong with a graphic designer or a branding company, it's pretty much that you violated someone's intellectual property rights. That's usually what goes wrong, or you have a dispute with a client or maybe a contractor or an employee. But as you're just getting up and running, your risk is pretty low. And so the need to spend the money and time and energy to set up a corporate entity may not be worth it. So you want to talk with a lawyer and an accountant or a tax professional to make sure you're making that decision the best for your company. It depends. There could be other reasons. Maybe you have a big inheritance, and so you worry that people know you have money, and now you've kind of got a target on your back, and so you're maybe more at risk, and you have more to protect. So there could be, different issues that may pop up, or maybe you are, working in an industry where you're using a lot of other people's intellectual property in your work, and so there's more of a risk that it could go wrong. There's all kinds of different scenarios, so there's no one size fits all. But as a general principle, I find that for most graphic designers and branding companies, when they're just getting started, that LLC or corporate protection is not a super high priority. It may be later as you grow. The other thing to think about is insurance. So insurance, I say, is kind of the flip side of the corporate entity coin. So again, insurance protects you if something goes wrong, if you get sued or if you have an accident or something terrible happens. Insurance is basically going to pay for what went wrong. So the LLC builds that fence, but if you get sued, it's not going to really help you pay the person who was injured. Insurance will actually pay the person who was injured, and it will usually hire an attorney for you, which is the most expensive part of being sued usually. So I might even advise a graphic designer or branding company to think about insurance before or, at the same time as you're thinking about setting up that LLC. It's a good time to think about, do I need some insurance? Can I get insurance cheaply enough that maybe I don't need an LLC? Maybe I've got enough insurance that if something goes wrong, I'll be fine. These are things to think about. I will say the two kind of critical points in business that I say, let's definitely think about forming an entity and getting some insurance if you haven't already, is if you open an office, so that your own office space. If you're watching a video, you can see I'm sitting in my office. If you have an office where either your team is coming or clients are coming to visit you, again, that's raising your risk level because someone could knock over a candle and set it on fire, or they could trip on your steps and break their leg. It just kind of ups the risk of something going wrong if you are in a physical office space. The second time to think about, increasing your protection is if you're adding employees. So these are not contractors. These are like real employees on your team. And this is because there are a million different employment regulations. You are now going to have to kind of pull on your big girl panties a little bit and make sure that you're doing all the things the right way, because you can get sued for employment practices for discrimination. You could have claims if you're, if you're not complying with unemployment regulations or not paying people the right way, overtime and all those things. It just opens a Pandora's box of more risk when you're adding employees to your team. So since your risk is going up, we want to make sure that you're protected for that. All right, so the last thing that I want to talk about for graphic designers and branding companies, hopefully you are thinking about this more than other businesses because you are creating visual work, is being really careful when you're using what I call third-party work, third-party creative work, third-party content. So this means things you did not create. So if you are, let's say, creating a logo for someone, and actually I have a client that has a really cute logo. They have a subscription box for, and I'll drop the link. I can't remember the exact name that they're using this right now, but it's a subscription box for dog lovers. So it's got like treats and toys and all these different things, and they have a really cute logo. And they used a stock image of a dog as kind of the starting point of that logo. So if you are doing things like that, if you're incorporating, stock art, images, video, music into any of your work that you're doing with clients or for your own business, you need to be really careful that you have the right license. So you're getting permission, and you're getting it in writing, and maybe you're even paying a little money so that you're sure that you're doing it the right way. And that you're not just grabbing something from a Google image search. Because what could happen if you're using work in a client project, that client may come after you because what's going to happen, let's say you grab a photo or something from Google image search, you don't get permission, you incorporate it into a client project, and then the client is the one that's going to get the takedown notice or the cease and desist letter, the nastygram from whoever owns that photo, and it was used without permission. And then they're going to come after you. They're not going to be happy about it. And then you're going to have to make it right, or you're going to lose that client relationship or damage your reputation. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong. So we want to make sure that we're doing it right in the first instance. Because often it's, 3 or 5 years later that this stuff kind of comes back from the dead. And it can be very expensive and stressful to deal with at that time. You're looking at, the maximum damages if you get sued for copyright infringement is $150,000 per work. So let's say you have 5 photos, that's 5 times $150,000. Now, are they always going to get that amount? No. But will they threaten you with that amount? Yes. And will you probably have to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars to, resolve that without getting sued? Yes. Are you maybe going to have to hire a lawyer and spend, hundreds or thousands of dollars? Yes. So it's much cheaper and simpler to pay $5 or $10 or even $50 or $100 for a license and make sure you're doing things the right way the first time. And especially if it's in a client project, documenting that, making sure that the client knows if there are any rules around how they can use it or the number of times they can use it. You want to be really, really careful about that, because like I said, that this is another area other than kind of client disputes and, issues with contractors. This is an area that I do see pop up occasionally for my graphic design clients, that they have issues here. All right. I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you are thinking I need a lot of these contracts, don't worry, we've got you covered at theawbfirm.com. We actually have a bundle specifically for creative service providers, including graphic designers and branding companies. So it's going to include all the things that I've talked about, all of those core contracts that you need, all in a bundle for a discounted price versus, buying them one by one. So definitely go check that out. We'll include a link in the show notes if you're interested in that. Or you can, if you just need one thing, of course, they're all available a la carte. So let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to hit me up with a DM on Instagram or Facebook. Or send us an email. We love and are always happy to chat and make sure that you are getting the right legal documents for your particular business. All right. I will see you guys next time.